LinkedIn live streaming here, the third LinkedIn live streaming here from Human Inc. And very excited tonight because tonight we have the topic around technology innovation and the role of technology innovation when it comes to sustainability. And I'm blessed to have a very inspiring and experienced professional with us tonight, Sang Shin, who's Director of Digital Innovation at Temasek, dialing in from Singapore. So thank you so much, Sang Shin, for being game to play here. I know it's the first time you're on LinkedIn Live, so for me it was the third time. So we're all learning in these days, I guess. The reason why
happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really nice to connect, and that's what we've seen from the previous convos, that we kind of start with some questions and some ideas, and then the convo kind of takes its own life. The reason why I really invited you was that when we connected, you're also the founder of the IxSA, which is kind of, you can better describe it in a moment what you actually do. But as I understand it, it's really a community looking at the role of innovation and design when it comes to sustainability, which is also a question that I'm very passionate about. When I kind of came up with this topic, it was because we're hearing more and more of our clients in very diverse industries, from banking, insurance, manufacturing, logistics, bring questions up around sustainability, both from a kind of investor standpoint, that Bursa here in Malaysia and investors are putting more emphasis on reporting of sustainability metrics. Certain banks and so on are saying, well, by this and this date, X% of our portfolio has to be sustainable. Pension funds and so on are putting pressure on the companies in their portfolio. At the same time, leaders are also starting to see that their own employees are asking, what are we doing about sustainability from an employee value proposition and employer branding standpoint? And of course, maybe a little bit later, the pressure is coming from the market. I think there's probably more pressure from kind of government and investor side currently than there is for consumers. I don't know many people who would say, oh, I'm not buying that car unless it's green, or I'm not moving to that house unless it's green certified by some sort of standard and so on, right? But we're hearing this question come up more and more, and we're seeing that the role of technology to deliver sustainability results is very important. But of course, without innovation and design, how are we going to understand the human element of how to make it better and greener at the same time? And maybe also, does it have to become more expensive? Do I have to pay extra for not putting poison in my food in the supermarket, etc.? But maybe to kind of kick off the convo here a little bit, to start with, maybe you can kind of give me a feel for what is it actually that you do in Temasek. What's your role? What's a day in your week looking like?
Sure. No, happy to share that. And I just, as you said, this is kind of new for me as well. I never done a LinkedIn Live before, so always good. I'm always up for trying something new and seeing what happens and learning from the experience. What I do at Temasek, well, my role in Temasek is in innovation. And so what I do is I design and create and run innovation programs for the company. And it can be working with many different groups within the company to do that. So I have worked in different areas, such as sustainability, creating an accelerator there called HyperX that we ran a couple of years ago. I am working also on certain new areas, such as digital health and mental well-being, and creating some innovation programs there. And there are also other entities in Temasek that do venture build, such as our AI and blockchain pods, where I kind of act as a contributor and sort of a consultant in that sense. So that's what I do at Temasek. My day-to-day, it really varies. Like, part of the time is meeting and talking to people in the ecosystem, so that I know how to design certain things that is somewhat localized, but also very tailored to the current environment, and that's constantly changing. And so you can't just like sit in an ivory tower and design things. You really have to be in the mix with everybody in the ecosystem to understand how to weave things together. So a good chunk of my time is talking with people such as yourself and the ecosystem here and abroad as well. Then another chunk of my time is, as you can imagine, internal meetings. There's no way to escape those, but I try to crunch them together so that they're packed in a certain part of the day. And then I spent quite a few moments, especially after COVID happened, on internal reflection and self-reflection, and alone time, thinking about things away from the noise. And that's kind of my day in a nutshell. I mean, it varies from day to day, but generally it rotates around those three areas.
Very, very nice. And how do you see the role of technology and innovation, and the pressure for more sustainability kind of affecting the space that you're working in, and maybe the appetite from investment standpoint or from customer standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical, right? If you ask me, innovation is kind of part of the reason why we got to the situation we're in. We got inventive, we innovated, we created diesel fuel carbon engines, and it has helped society. If you compare the way of life today to, let's say, 200 years ago, first of all, we live a lot longer. And we have things such as running water and transport mode and electricity, air conditioning, refrigerators. All these are inventions and innovations that we have created along the way.
LinkedIn Live.
Yeah, LinkedIn Live. There you go. But it has also created issues, and the technology and innovation in and of itself isn't the issue. It's really how we as a species have leveraged and utilized it. And without going into all the details, we can just see what has happened, right? And so the competitive nature of private markets and so on and so forth has led to where we are right now. I do think that it's another way out, meaning what got us into here can also help us get out of this. And so if we can channel our efforts, and this is a big if, but there is movement towards the right direction now, into innovating for good in order to get us out of this quagmire we're in, I think we can do it. But it'll require a reorientation of values and goals and motivation. And that kind of reorientation doesn't happen overnight. It happens over years and decades even. And we've seen movement there from people such as Greta Thunberg, for example. Say what you will about her, but she did start a movement and opened up channels that didn't exist before her. All the way down to applications of the technology that's shifting around. So yeah, I think it plays absolutely critical. It got us kind of here, and I think it will help us get us out of here.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess you can say that to some extent there's maybe both a question of thinking of it as a zero-sum game, that either it's highly profitable and black, or it's highly expensive and very niche and not very profitable and green, is the kind of old thinking, right? And I think a lot of our clients are at least starting to see that actually sustainability is both a challenge and a pressure, but it's and an expectation, but it's also a huge business opportunity, right? And there's nothing wrong in making money doing things that are good for the planet. There's nothing wrong doing things that are good for people and making money in the process, right?
Yeah, no, why? Yeah, why would it be wrong? You shouldn't be wrong. You're right. It used to be, look, if you dial back 10, 20 years ago, and you said you're an sustainability wasn't such a key term back then. It was like the environmentalists or the tree huggers. And immediately it was like equated to some kind of nonprofit. If you made cash doing that, you were disingenuous and not to be treated seriously, and maybe even not a good person for trying to back then what would have been greenwashing, right? So but that changed. And for me, the seminal moment of when there was a clear shift in that mentality was when companies such as Impossible Foods came on the market, and that's a sustainability company in food technology. And by gosh, investors loved it. I mean, at its heyday, it was a darling in startup world, and repeatedly shown at the spotlight as a unicorn type of growth, and everybody, there was a lot of hype around it, and you have never seen that before. But that was, in my opinion, one of the first moments where it was very clear, like, hey, you can make a lot of money investing into companies that are about sustainability. But if you really drill down into why that's the case, again, it's not the investing or the tech or any of this stuff, right? Those are just enablers or executors of what the root is. And the root is ultimately there was value placed in society by people in something that is sustainable, causing for such phenomenon to happen. So in the case of Impossible Food, there was value all of a sudden that was placed by consumers, people in this case, in sustainable meat product. That did, without that, I don't care how great Impossible Food tech is and how cheap they could have made it, there's no demand for the value, then it's never going to get there. So if you think about it, what you're describing is actually a result through the chain of actions of the root, which is a value that has been placed on such things, and that value is growing aggregate-wise from people around the world.
Absolutely, and I guess you can say from a design standpoint, we often talk about viability, feasibility, desirability, and there are many business models that have done that very well, that have actually created externalities, external pain to other stakeholders that were not customers, where we took the water for some people in India, or we polluted the air. Even if it wasn't produced in Singapore, it might actually affect citizens of Singapore, and the smog and the haze and all this stuff, right? So there are many examples of business models that are desirable by customers, that are viable from a technology standpoint, feasible. But now the question of sustainability has kind of been added to this matrix, or to this Venn diagram of what a business needs to be able to answer for it to be profitable and scalable and future proof. But is there maybe more pressure coming from the investment side and from the regulators and from government and from the stock exchange than there is from the consumers in Southeast Asia? Are consumers actually willing and ready to pay more? Because there are certain spaces where better also means costing more, that you get what you pay for. And if you want it cheap, then some people's going to suffer somehow because human rights were not paid attention to, or water was polluted, or air was polluted, or other negative outcomes, right? Is there a mismatch between investors' pressure, because maybe it's like they're setting the trend, but the consumers are still maybe more focused about affordability, maybe particularly now with COVID, where maybe job security is down, maybe you lost one income in the household. We love to buy organic products, but can we afford it right now, baby? But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I do agree. I mean, if you think about it, one of the analogies one can think about is organic food. People are willing to pay more for that because they think it's healthier, it's better for the environment, and so on and so forth. Such things didn't exist in, let's say, the 50s. Today, you go to a supermarket, there's a clear delineation or a segment, or it's properly stamped as organic. There's authority that can certify that it is, and it costs more, and people are willing to pay for it. You can't really do that right now. I think you will, but right now you can't. For example, when I get presented with two products or services, let's say I'm in procurement of a big company, I have no idea what the supply chain of delivering the service or product to me is, and I'm going to buy it at scale. So it's just completely obfuscated, right? It's a black box. And even if I wanted to incorporate it, which that is coming with ESG and all this stuff, and also from individual consumers as well, who place a premium on this stuff more and more, definitely more in the affluent countries like Europe than in the developing nations. At the same time, you can't exercise that desire to choose, because that information is withheld or just not discussed or reported on at the point of transaction. So I think that's one thing. I think that's going to change. I think over time there will be some indicator of maybe it's the carbon footprint required to have produced certain things, or general damage or benefit to the world essentially and society. That would be an ideal end state, right? So if I see products, yes, there's a dollar price to it, but then there's also some indicator of how this product was produced.
Yeah.
You know, we keep hearing things about like Nike shoes being produced by child labor here and there, and it only comes out when there's a blow up in news. I mean, it would be better for it to just be more transparent, and then companies wouldn't be chasing ultimate price wars,
And compare apple
leading
to
to
apple as well. Yeah.
correct. So you know, it would yield a self-regulatory pricing mechanism within companies as they price in the risk of. I mean, it's transparent, so everybody's going to know you have child labor, which is kind of not good. So you won't do it, kind of a thing. Yeah. So that's one part of my thoughts on this.
So that's also where you can say the role of reporting and setting up mechanisms that makes industries very transparent to B2C buyers or to B2B buyers or B2G buyers will become very important from a kind of decision-making standpoint and evaluating what's actually a good deal for me. At the same time as it means that you need to suddenly completely rethink maybe how you create value, your business model, your value chain, who you can buy from in terms of suppliers. So there's also a lot of pressure on businesses to redefine or rethink or innovate their business models, their products, their services, and maybe even their marketing as well. So for those that are progressive and leaning in, there will be advantage here. For those who are maybe scared of this or trying to delay the day by which they have to do this and do as little as possible, but just paint it green, you know, there will be a point where they cannot get away with that anymore, and they would maybe have lost out because other people have learned what they a long time ago, what they have only started learning now, right? So that's maybe also where the role of innovation and technology is very key in order to deliver sustainability outcomes. How do you see the shift for organizations to be able to do that? What's actually the challenge that you're seeing amongst companies and industry?
I mean, in order for what we're talking about to happen, right? It ultimately there needs to be demand for it. Otherwise, the other angle is it becomes a regulatory thing where the top-down government, you know, makes it a law that you need to do certain things. But that's not the way, like, for example, organic foods happen. You know, there's no law saying that, you know, companies do it because there's demand for it and they make business and they generate revenue and profits out of it. And I think the similar thing needs to happen, you know, in our discussion as well, where people there's a demand to know what the footprint is of this. And that comes from people. People should demand, and you know, I think there is more interest and growth in this area, and ultimately it'll hit a point where businesses, through market forces, understand that it's now a competitive advantage, or like you said, a business model that could be even more, because businesses ultimately are profit and revenue driven, right? That's kind of the definition of a business. And so, like, but if you can translate that through the demand, which is a starting point from people, into business and market forces, right, that would self-regulate itself. And this is where capital market forces do come into play, and you know that, you know, governments, as the Soviet Union has found out, you can't replicate that even with the smartest people in the room. Like that, you leave up to market dynamics to figure out how it sorts itself out. But you know, what you do is you set up the platform for such a thing to take place, and then hopefully it can.
And exactly, and that's maybe also where I'm seeing that the need to shift the conversation is very hard, because on the one hand, yes, there is money to be made from sustainability, but there's also some questions where sometimes there's also money to be made from not being sustainable and doing the wrong thing. But do we want to create such a society? What is the role of business to create a better future, right? And how can we hold each other accountable that we are playing by the new rules, because these are new rules. Most large organizations did not play by these rules previously and are still figuring out what the rules are and how to play by them and make money in the process, right? Consumers are confused. They don't know how to make choices. Did I actually buy, was it bad for the environment if I bought a new
Exactly.
phone or car, and is it really green, or is it, people looking for bragging points to say, oh, I'm very friendly of the environment, except these other things I'm doing, right? So I think there's a lot of learning we have to do as a species, back to what you said, right? In an organizational context, I think there's very little awareness or understanding of what sustainability and this, I guess you can call it a revolution, is going to mean for us, because it's probably the biggest question we have in front of us, together with technology and the impact of disruptive technologies, right? So do you think that leaders in large organizations are actually adequately equipped for this conversation? Are their employees adequately equipped for this conversation? And if not, what kind of skill sets do you think are needed, or mindset shifts? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things we have to be realistic about is you can't. It's like all of a sudden, everybody's not going to turn into an environmental scientist and understand all of these concepts. That's just not going to happen. There are people who have been doing this for decades and are specialists, and they should be tapped on as specialist resources to help form everything, right? And this is where you get people, if you asked me 10 years ago, was there a chief sustainability officer type of role? No, there wasn't. Now there is, and the people who usually come into these roles are these specialists with very deep experience and academic also knowledge on the issues at hand. The key for existing business leaders is listening and then adeptly translating into the business strategy and operations, and incorporating these inputs that they take in from these experts, and doing it in a dynamic way as a market changes, where there is increasing demand. So a lot of companies have to do it for PR reasons, right? They're going to lose marketing campaigns if they don't do it. What Ronaldo Cristiano did with Coca-Cola, that wasn't necessarily a sustainability thing, but you can imagine, right? Like how it could impact things, right? So yeah, water's healthier. But my point is, the leaders have to, they have to know how to weave and incorporate this additional set of information into a dynamically and quickly changing marketplace. And the ones who can do that and navigate that well are the ones who are going to succeed. And the ones who fail at that or are slower are the ones who run the risk of, as you mentioned earlier, falling behind, or doing something or making some move where some negative or damage is done, where they're going to have to undo it.
Very interesting. So maybe it's the design thing on me, but what I'm hearing is also that organizations that are able to think ahead, listen outside your own ivory tower to what's going on in the market, what are interesting new startups doing, what are competitors or non-competitors in other industries doing about this question or this challenge, and discover problems sooner rather than later, and start kicking the ball up the field and trying to do something, experimenting, learning, are going to have advantages over those who don't. So the kind of external, back to what you said earlier about, like, you spend a fair bit of your time actually getting on random calls with random people, because you need, and of course they're not random, but you need to go outside of the traditional perimeters of what industry are you in, what kind of people are worth talking to. Actually, maybe you could learn something from people with way less education than yourself, or from countries with a lower income per capita, or we need to be much more curious in a way, and much more inquisitive and much more imaginative about what the world is going to look like if we're going to solve this problem, and if we're going to reap all the benefits and all these opportunities. It also brings about, last week I was facilitating a kind of a roundtable for healthcare and wellness industry, right, with many different players here in Malaysia, right? And what we could see from this convo was there was a massive appetite for collaboration and unusual collaborations, right? And learning from each other, and that we need to be more aligned. No one can, in a way, solve these problems alone, but most organizations, especially large ones, are fairly poor at partnering, right? And oh, you want to be a partner? You're not a big company. How many $1 million did you get as income in the last 3 years? Well, we just started 6 months ago, and we're pre-revenue, or we have just signed on our first customer, right? Or we have a vendor registration program and a panel that needs to evaluate you against some global players or whatever, right? So in that sense, there's a lot of challenges in the existing setup of large companies that makes them less curious, less open, less collaborative. And the questions around open innovation for sustainability is a massive opportunity, I think. Is that something that you're I mean, you mentioned a bit about the incubator you've been running in Temasek and so on. Is that something that maybe share?
No, totally. I mean, I completely agree.
Sitting in corporate and saying, hey, this is really interesting. How can I get started? What did you learn from that space, and how have you been working with it?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, this is not too dissimilar from, like, let's say, digital transformation. The key is that the market, the environment is changing underneath the foundations, underneath the company. The marketplace, the environment is changing. And one such example was digitization, right? And digital transformation. And so that was a foundational shift that was occurring in the environment. And again, the companies that were early on able to embrace such changes, first from the leadership and then through the implementation and execution of programs within the enterprise, are the ones who benefited, right? And then the ones who couldn't do that, well, you know, they're behind and playing catch up, and some may not catch up as a result. Sustainability is another fundamental shift in the foundation happening. And again, once, you know, the companies that are able to properly, adeptly incorporate the changes into its culture, into its business, into its strategy, so on and so forth, and operations, are the ones that are going to, again, benefit from. So the shift and the changes is both a good and a bad thing. It's good if you're early and you can adapt to it and leverage it. It's bad if you put it off, or you don't think it's a big deal, and then it's like, you know, then 10 years later you're still learning about Agile. You know, and the world has moved on. So for companies, and open innovation and what you're describing is absolutely important. You know, they need to keep an open mind and understand how the things are shifting. What are the dynamics? So what is being valued? What are the opportunities being offered by these changes, by being early in those changes? And then you need to have capabilities to quickly test them out. Usually you have a lab or maybe some innovation programs. You can have even investment programs like corporate venture capital arms to get exposure into essentially what is happening, and make, you know, small but many investments across and spread it out. I mean, it's not a shoot and pray type of thing. I mean, you have to practice, you know, a principled and logical method on how to do it. But you do it. And so what you do is you increase your exposure and your surface area to the changes that are happening. And then you need to have this good feedback mechanism where you take that information back into your strategy and know how to incorporate it in. And you have to do both. You can't just have programs and then, you know, don't know how to, like, take the info back and process it. You have to have the programs, yes, and also listen to the information that's coming in, and take biases away from your decision making based on the data and information you're collecting. And that will help you drive your strategy in your business.
Exactly, because it's in essence what I'm hearing a lot from our clients is also that on the one hand, we want innovation, and we have had some maybe failed attempts at driving innovation and trying to be the next Google or whatever, because it's been a bit maybe naive. It's not been run with the right element of rigor or discipline, or it was too much rigor and not enough creativity. So to find that sweet spot, on the one hand, should we innovate everywhere and anywhere? Or should it tie back to the strategy and vision and the purpose of the company? Because sustainability is also very much about like, what role do you want to play? I mean, there are many sustainable development goals. Which ones is it that's a business opportunity for your company? We're not just talking about air and water here. Sustainability is much broader than that and has social aspects as well, right? So from that standpoint, strategy should inform innovation strategy, but at the same time, openness and learning should also inform your strategy, because you might discover new things when you set up that innovation lab and you start talking to customers, when you start inviting in startups and collaborating with the UN or whatever you're doing, a university department who has a COE around equitable development, economic development, or whatever it might be. You might learn new things that could be opportunities for your strategy. So it's not only that strategy should kill innovation if it's not targeted into the right KPIs, it's also that you're listening through trying things should inform your strategy. So it's a two-way street, right? And frankly, most organizations are a bit more rigid in that strategy comes from HQ, globally somewhere, down to regional, down to country level, follow the strategy. Oh, okay, what are we supposed to do? We met a startup, yeah, but what they're doing would be relevant in our market, but it doesn't translate back to our global strategy, right? So I think that type of wiring organizations to be able to listen and communicate and network inside the organization and outside will be key for the future of sustainable organizations. Do you have any thoughts on, like, if you were to look in the crystal ball that we don't have and imagine those organizations who have gotten this right, who would have helped us get towards a more sustainable future, a more sustainable society, a more just society? What are the kind of shifts that they would have made to how they drive innovation compared to how they do it now? What are the things they would have gotten right? What are the things they would have maybe avoided, the mistakes that they would have avoid making? What are the right mistakes that they should have made to learn? And any thoughts on that if you were to kind of guess a bit?
I mean, this is not an easy question to answer, just because the answer depends on the type of company, right? So if you're like Exxon or something, it's a very different answer than if you're like, you know, a company more attuned to sustainability by default. You know, like a solar like company or something like that, right? So it's hard because of that. But I mean, generally one can say that, you know, the ones who succeed so far, or who have shown some, and okay, we also have to define what succeed for the company means. You know, it can't just be a purely profit-driven definition of succeed, because that's, again, kind of what got us into where we are right now. So, I mean, if we start from like understanding what success is to some degree incorporating practices and influencing the industry that a company is in, such that it is improving or increasing the impact and positive impact to sustainability by doing its business. And it's a relative thing. Yeah, it has to be a relative thing. You can't, it's apples to oranges, because again, companies do different things. But if you're saying like, look, it used to be this way, but now it's this way, and this way is that much less of a burden to the planet, for example, then that is an improvement, right? And that's a kind of relative measure that you can do an apples to apples thing than comparing across industries. And the ones who have done have shown influence, right? And so that's one of the things I look out for. It's like, hey, did the company influence the industry that it's in? You know, one example is like BlackRock. BlackRock's in the investment management or asset management industry, largest one, right? You know, coming up 10 trillion. But they have succeeded to some degree, I would say, because they have influenced the industry with its pledges. It's not perfect. You can nitpick here and there, of course. But generally speaking, they have turned the tide and really gotten the ball rolling in the investment management industry by pledging to, you know, focus a certain amount of capital and effort and time and investment into sustainability-related investments, programs and whatnot. And to that degree, I think they're one of the stories where you can say, yeah, in the way we define success, they have succeeded to some degree. And there are other examples of them in other industries as well, where they have shown that, you know, compared to, let's say, 10 years ago, there's more activity and that's showing impact, and that they're also influencing their peers in their industry and in effect changing the marketplace. So they're now part of the, we were talking about earlier, the foundational shifts that is happening. And so rather, a company being reactive to the foundational shift, a company that is proactive and actually influencing the shift itself, such as BlackRock by influencing the industry, that is what I would say is a successful case, right? If you ask me, because now you're part of shaping the change, not just.
And you also have the advantage in a way. You define in a way the metrics that's going to put your competitors under pressure, right? If you can lean into the future and begin influencing your value chain and saying, well, this is how we do business. How do you do business, right? How are you going to justify that to your shareholders? How are you going to justify that to your employees? How are you going to justify that to your customers?
Yeah, the large share of success comes from what I call the shapers. The shapers are the ones who shape how things unfold. The refiners is a margin game, and those are the companies that just go on volume and margin, but they're not the shapers.
Yeah. What do you then think are from an investment standpoint? And I know there's some things you can't disclose, obviously, in what you're doing at Temasek. That's still confidential, and we'll learn about it later. Excited for that. But what do you think are the maybe nearer term spaces where there's more opportunities in terms of investments in sustainability, or companies that have integrated sustainability and kind of triple bottom line principles and so on? Are there certain sustainable development goals that are maybe lighter or easier to make money on faster? Some that are really hard and where we wish there was something, but it's harder to find good targets to invest in, or the demand from the value chain or the customer is simply there. Any thoughts on the hotspots? Because I'm sure making investments.
So yeah, you're right. I can't really divulge much information on activities, but what I can do is I can share like public information about the company and its investment practices in sustainability, for example. Like, so Temasek is not a purely profit-driven entity, like let's say perhaps a hedge fund or some private equity firm reporting to its shareholders. It's a multi-generational, patient capital type of investment entity. And it mixes multiple things into its decision making. We say doing well, doing good, doing right, among other things we say, but we do practice it. And so, the investments we make are not 100% purely just looking from a lens of profit in the returns of the investment later. Having said that, we do have a lot of, we have pledged, made pledges about contributing and helping out with the sustainability movement. And we do focus on some areas. As you can see from the publicly disclosed activities we're involved in, decarbonization, carbon reduction, that is one area that we are interested in and have activities in. We did the venture with BlackRock. We're involved with the carbon exchange here that we're setting up. And there's other activities that we're involved in that space. And it's just a serious issue, right? We just saw the IPCC report this weekend. It's not a good situation. And for that reason, yes, there could be profits to be made, but also it's a serious issue. The more we find out and analyze, the more we're like, okay, this is not good. And so that's one area. The other area is like food and agri-tech. That's another area that we've always been in and increasing. So like, we are a nonprofit arm, for example, Temasek Foundation, through funding from the Temasek Trust nonprofit funds is, we hold something like the Livability Challenge, which has now been on like multi-years and running. And, out of that has come very interesting, innovative companies, such as companies that create, for example, milk, alternative milk production. Or in this year, the winner, I just was there to see it, was the ability to actually decarbonize the atmosphere through ocean using technology, and basically leveraging our oceans. those are some areas that there is other areas that we also have involvement in, such as digital cities and energy efficiency in that sense,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. But I guess the main message I want to say with regards to the company is that it takes a holistic view on very seriously when it makes an investment decision, and it's definitely not just a profit motive reason for doing what we do.
And that's really interesting, and I guess also part of this conversation is very much the what you said before about redefining what success means. That is not just making money at any cost, and that we actually want to evaluate the total cost to society of this value being created for a particular customer. Because even if that customer appreciates a low price point and high value creation, if we have those externalities, it's a collective loss, right? So as individual consumers, we've been taught by capitalism, the traditional capitalism until now, that whatever I want is my right to buy, and I know best what's right for me. So who are you to tell me that I cannot buy a petrol guzzler or fly on business class or do other things that is enjoyable, right? But now everyone is starting to question these type of systems, saying, well, it's really fair that you, just because you have the kind of education and that kind of income, that you can live a life like that, right? So even at an individual level, the questions are being raised. At a family level, the questions are certainly being raised, right? Amongst friends. Oh, already? Oh, do you really? That's cool, right? So there's a lot of shifts in how we define value. Money is only one type of value, and the values, what society we want, how we want to treat each other, how we want to treat the planet, is becoming more important. Um, the value of ideas is becoming, in a way, and especially ideas executed, is becoming more important than money in itself. So the whole language of business is, in a way, being reshaped through the ESG movement, I guess, and sustainability. Right? What do you think might be the impact of COVID and working from home and recession and so on the rise of sustainability? Has it been an accelerant? Has it actually been a brake pad? Because yeah, it's very nice, but this year we just want to against meat and just stay alive. What are you kind of hearing in the industry? Because I'm kind of hearing mixed messages, to be honest. Both some that are become like have woken up to this individually or as organizations, but also some that are like, we are aware of it, we do care about it, but right now it's just cutthroat. Right? What's kind of been your take on
I mean, it is. It's exactly as you said. It's a mixed bag, right? But it's different at different leveling of thinking. So at the
that?
at the high level of thinking, there's no denying that it's actually COVID is a. There's a couple of things, right? One is, look, the whole thing about animals and humans coexisting, and when viruses jump from one species to another. If you think about deforestation and all this stuff, and animals coming closer to human contact, more contact, and all this stuff, it's related. Even if this particular case wasn't because of the attribution isn't directly linked to deforestation, let's say. You can imagine that as we do more of this, there's going to be more contact, and the chances, it's a numbers game, but the odds go up, and we're going to have another one again because of close contact. So, that's one thing, right? It's a consequence. We're playing with fire. The other one is it was also an eye opener because if you looked at the carbon reduction in the world last year, it did go down, but not that much. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was in the single digits, and that is given basically the entire world kind of shut down, right? I would have thought like, hey, our carbon output would have gone down like 30% maybe,
Yeah.
since everybody kind of just stopped working for a bit or worked from home and nobody went to the factories for a bit and all that. But no, it wasn't. It was just a tiny drop and relative, right? And so that kind of actually was an eye opener to me because that tells us the path ahead that we have. So it was an eye opener.
Yeah.
More people should talk
What
about
is it
that
that's
fact,
about the path ahead, do you think?
that it's hard. Look,
Yeah.
even after shutting down, right? And riots of people not being able to go out and fly and do all this stuff. I mean, not that aviation was the main contributor. We know what the main contributors are, but still, it's not an easy thing to reduce and that is why as the IPCC report came out and showed, it's not easy, even though companies have pledged left and
Yeah.
right. And so
And
it
that's
is a challenge.
yeah, that's exactly why I'm thinking that there's all this talk about like 10x moonshot thinking and so on, right? Which can easily be like pushed aside by very like practical, logical thinking business people. Yeah, but that's crazy. You know, our company, we're an insurance company. What do you mean, right? So the cynics can easily push that aside. But to some extent, you could say the sustainability challenge is a 10x challenge. It's not about making a car 3% better than your competitor or 3% better than your last year. It's about if you have to make a car that's 10 times more sustainable than the one is in your factory this month, then you need radically different organizational capabilities, radically different business models, maybe radically different talent, radically different thinking about investment and so on. Right? Do you have any kind of, have you seen any shifts in some of the portfolio companies? You can't reveal all the details, but have you seen any kind of shift in the thinking or in the doing that could maybe be useful for other organizations to be aware of from a kind of how do we become that sort of organization? How do we change how we think about the future? How do we change what we're doing today to create a more sustainable future as organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it's true, right? I mean, it is a multiplier problem of that magnitude, and I mean, it's actually, I've heard of it's the phrase called Earth shot. It's not a moon shot. It's actually an Earth shot because we're trying to save the Earth. Yeah, but it's a crazy idea that's a shot. And I think look, you have to do it. You have to have those, right? You can't like neglect those because therein could come again, like I said at the beginning of this conversation. That's how we got here. We've had moonshots back, we'll call them moonshots back then, of inventions and innovations, right? That led us here. I mean, look at where we are now. I mean, compared to 200 years ago, it's crazy, right? If you took somebody from 200 years, 1800s and transferred, they think that they're in magic land. And that's what it is, right? And so it can happen. It has happened. It can happen again.
It must
but at the same time, that alone it's actually not really sustainable because we have to evolve as a species. So if we develop some, silver bullet, fusion reactor energy, something like, wow, that just solves a problem, but we don't change the way we are, we're going to run into, again, the same situation just with that newer capability because we're just going to overuse, over whatever, and then just run into, and then we're going to be stuck again. So my point is, yes, we do need those innovations in technology and inventions also included because we're in a dire situation, but we can't just have that. We also need to modify ourselves as a human and as an individual and as a species so that we don't just slash and burn everything again just for the benefit of ultimately right now it's just becoming rich. and I think one of the last things I'll leave you with is I do agree that this form of currency that we have today is incomplete. It is very evident. That's why such a thing as carbon accounting is now being talked about a lot, and it's because it's incomplete. It didn't take into picture externalities outside of the financial transactions in capital markets, and there's a lot of externalities that impact real things such as our lives. And so one of the things I'm working on, so you mentioned the Innovation by Sustainability Alliance, which is, in a nutshell, what it is, it's a manifesto. It's a bunch of us who have gotten together and said, hey, innovation for sustainability is broken. It doesn't work. You can't take the way you were doing it for like Airbnb and try to like save the world with that process. We're not building a mobile app here. The time frame is longer. The source of funding is different, along with different expectations. The way of measuring success is not the same. We're not just gunning for like, growth and returns. The mental well-being of people, the founders, is important if you're going to sustainably do it. You can't like brute force yourself and never sleep and try and build it. And so for these reasons, we got together and we've crafted a manifesto that essentially is a counterpoint to the way innovation is being done today for sustainability. And we're in the middle of creating frameworks to enact the principles, the value systems, a way to enact it in our day-to-day jobs. One of the things in that enactment or the frameworks we're building is compensation for doing good, because it's not being done. But it's important because, as I said, the financial currency of today is incomplete. So one of the things we're thinking is like, hey, if you do good, you should be compensated. You should have a bank.
You're
so
awesome.
Like, what should happen ideally is I keep doing good, right? I keep collecting credits for doing good. I helped this startup. The startup changed the world and saved 50 gigatons of carbon. Hey, I collected some doing good credit. Or I did these activities. So now I have this bank credit. And, that should be what I then exchange into currency to do barter, to buy a meal at a restaurant, to buy my new bicycle, to send my child to education. And so then the way I earn is by doing good. And then that exchange rate into the currency for transactions is the way I pay for things. And wouldn't that be great? Because then a lot of us then would be motivated to becoming good millionaires, in the sense that we're millionaires in good credit.
I love it, right? And I know there are folks in finance and banking and insurance circles talking about these ideas in terms of how can you actually rewire society from a fintech standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a banking standpoint, to measure, report, interact, transact new types of value, virtual currencies, and so on, right? If you think of it from a what can I say, as a community, you're looking at these questions in terms of what frameworks do we need, what tools do we need to change the conversation, to change the work, to reward the right behaviors. And you're talking about, it's not enough that we leave technology. It's not enough that companies become more innovative or drive the old Silicon Valley or kind of greed-driven entrepreneurship and innovation. We need to actually also innovate ourselves as a species. We need to innovate our education systems. We need to change our conversations, essentially, right? What do you think, if we take a more optimistic hat, what might go right? What might be some of the maybe easier spaces where we can begin? Because I think a lot of people want to do something. A lot of people look at their kids and their family and the future and say, how can I be part of the team? And I think a lot of people have woken up during COVID and become more reflective of their own health, of their family, of the community. Here in Malaysia, they had this white flag thing going around. How can we send food to people who have lost their jobs and have zero income? I have personally been looking after a few people that I've been helping and so on. And I think all of us have kind of become more aware that these things are not just things you read about in the news. This is very real, right? What might be some opportunities for people who are keen to do more in their daily job, in their organization? What are your thoughts on like how can can everyone join the IxSA? Is that what they should do?
Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
anyone can join. You can go to anyone can join IxSA. It's just go to the website IxSA.earth and you can join. And by joining, you just say I agree with these principles. They make sense to me. If you want to do more and join us in some of the frameworks and groups, then you just let us know, and you can join one of the many sub-focus groups that's working really hard right now at creating the framework. What can people do? Look, there's many things we can do. First, it starts with yourself. So you, as yourself, as an individual, have to look in the mirror and say, what can I do to be part of this? Because if you're not true to yourself, there's no way you're going to be fake helping or changing others. And so that's the first thing, is you got to look at yourself and see, I'm not, not everyone's going to all of a sudden become a, vegan and like, but there are incremental activities you can change, right? And there are apps and things coming out online to help you, guide you through that, to live a better sustainable life, right? A
It's
smaller
becoming
digital
easier,
carbon footprint. Yeah, and as I said, as we talked about earlier, it's quite hard right now because there's information's not out there. But there's certain things, if you taking public transport, like eating a little less of this and doing a little
yeah.
more of that. These things you can do yourself. So it starts there. Then from yourself, then your family is the next closest thing, right? So then you have a family, either you have parents or you have kids, and then you can instill, ultimately it's a set of values, right? With these people. So if you have children and the way they grow up, you instill these value systems. Hey, like don't slash and burn to become a millionaire. The life's not about that. There's more to life than that. That kind of, you can do that with your family, right? So that's the next stage 2 outside of yourself. And then in your workplace, you can get involved. Many companies do have programs where they try to, and you can be an active participant or even leader in some of these programs. So those are obvious ways. Finally, outside of work, there are communities such as IxSA or other things where you can join people who are pioneering the change in mentality and value systems. Because ultimately, it's a value system change when it comes to people. That's what it is, right? And profit at all costs so you can buy a Ferrari. That kind of mentality maybe was at one point the holy grail of life, but maybe not anymore. I mean, okay, maybe go into space on your own spaceship might be, but that also has some challenges.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But thank you so much for sharing. And I think what I'm in a way taking away from this convo, it's tough to summarize a whole hour in a couple of minutes here. But there's certainly something around the challenges are massive, the opportunities are massive. There's actually a lot of good work already happening. There are experts we can leverage that we can invite into our companies, organizations, processes to discover how to be more sustainable. There are individual opportunities to start asking ourselves, what do we care about? And what can I do if I spend 1 hour to just assess my own impact on the environment that I'm living in and the value chains that I'm part of? What's one thing I can do to get started? And it's maybe not as hard as it used to be. Maybe it's just on Google search a way to replace one vendor with another, to start consuming differently, to sell your car or buy a car that's green or whatever it might be, right? Who is it you're talking with and that you can influence? What are the things you can do maybe more at societal level, because maybe that's also not just good for the environment but also good for your career and future skills to actually be in those spaces, right? So it's not only that you're supporting the world by joining IxSA, you're actually also supporting yourself and your own learning, and often the people who are curious about the future are also the ones that are more likely to find it, right? So I think definitely very inspiring to connect with you today, and thanks so much for sharing with all the colleagues online here. A big invitation, but we will definitely drop the link to your website in the comments once it gets posted in a few minutes. But also invitation for everyone who listened in, who either got inspired, disagreed, got provoked, something, have an example, have a question, please pop that in the comments as well. Do share it with folks in your network, back to what we just talked about, right? Because maybe you get the joke, but maybe people who haven't seen this perspective yet, or who's struggling with how can we get started. So I'm really, really grateful that we had this conversation, and I think we should never underestimate the power of a few crazy people. They're the only people who's ever changed history are a few crazy people getting started, and I'm sure it was a few crazy people in a good way that started this movement, totally. Right? And if we start connecting all the crazy people, actually, there's a lot of crazy people in the world who are dreaming of a better world, and they're actually making it happen one day at a time.
Yeah.
I think I heard an interview with Yuval Harari, if I say his name correctly, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and he was speaking at Google, and they were interviewing him, and he was saying that today there's so much power in technology, and engineers, entrepreneurs, investors, and so on always see the upside of technology, and they don't really see how that amazing thing that they have invented could be used in a negative way or could have negative impacts, right? So he said, as a historian, he tries to kind of remind us of these things, right? So I wanted to kind of also leave with that thought that we only think of innovation as a positive, but also that we need to be much more conscious as a species of that power. We're like a baby with an atomic gun, right? So we need to be very wise about our creativity. So on that note, thank you so much for joining tonight, and really, really grateful you could make it and take time out of your evening here. Do stay strong and safe in Singapore, and I hope we can connect in person when I'm coming down, when things open up.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and now I can say I've done a LinkedIn Live event.
Can add that to your LinkedIn profile. All right.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks much. Stay green.
Okay. All right, bye.
Cheers, mate.